The night Adrian Mercer almost didn't come back. Nobody knew except a 26-year-old nursing student who was only there because her supervisor had called in sick. That's the part that still gets him, the randomness of it. If Sandra Obi hadn't come down with a fever that Tuesday evening in November, none of it would have happened. He would have walked into Emerson, signed the paperwork left, and that would have been the end of it. But Sandra did get sick, and so Petra Vance was the one standing behind the dossiage desk when Adrian walked through the sliding doors of St. Michael's Hospital in downtown Toronto, still wearing his coat from the board meeting he'd left 40 minutes earlier without explanation. He didn't look like a man in crisis. That was the thing about Adrian Mercer. He never looked like anything other than exactly what he was supposed to be. CEO of Mercer Lund Capital, 41 years old, third-generation money softened by the kind of discipline that made people assume he was simply born organized. He had a jawline that photographs well and a handshake that closed deals. His assistant had once said he could walk into a burning building and people would assume he'd scheduled it. He checked in for a laceration on his hand. A glass had broken in his office. Or so the paperwork said. Petra noticed the paperwork didn't mention how the glass had broken. She noticed other things too. The way he sat in the plastic chair as if the act of sitting required permission. The way he stared at the floor between his shoes with a focus that wasn't really focus at all. The way, when she called his name the second time to bring him through, he startled slightly, like someone waking up mid-fall. "Mr. Mercer?" She held the door open. "Right this way." He followed her without speaking. The cubicle was small. They always are. Curtain the color of old mint, a single chair bolted to the wall, a paper-covered exam table that crinkled whenever anyone breathed near it. Petra pulled on gloves and asked him to show her the hand. It was a clean cut, 3 centimeters across the base of his palm. Not deep enough for stitches, but enough to bleed steadily if ignored. He'd wrapped it in what looked like a monogrammed handkerchief, now soaked through. "This happened how long ago?" she asked. "About 2 hours. You waited 2 hours to come in?" He glanced at her. Not with irritation, the way patients sometimes do when they feel corrected. Just looked at her. "I was finishing something." She cleaned the wound. He didn't flinch. Most people flinch. "Busy day?" she asked, not because she needed to keep him talking, but because the silence in the cubicle had a weight to it that she didn't quite know how to carry. "They all are," he said. She pressed gauze against his palm and held it there. His hand was warm. She could feel the steadiness of it, or maybe the effort of keeping it steady. "Do you have someone to call?" she asked. "To drive you home tonight?" He looked at her again. "The same way. Why would I need someone to drive me home?" "You shouldn't be driving with this hand," she said simply. It was true. It was also not entirely why she asked. There was a pause, the kind that has texture. "No," he said. "There isn't really anyone." She finished dressing the wound in silence, taped the edges with careful strips of medical tape, wrote up the discharge instructions in handwriting that was neater than the circumstances warranted because Petra Vance had a habit of doing things more carefully than strictly necessary. It was, her mother had always said, both her best quality and the one most likely to exhaust her. She handed him the sheet. He took it without reading it. "Get it looked at in 3 days," she said. "If there's redness spreading outward from the edges, don't wait. Come back sooner." He nodded, looked at the discharge paper the way you look at something when you're not actually seeing it. And then he didn't move, not rudely, not dramatically, just didn't stand up. Sat there on the crinkling paper with his dressed hand in his lap, and something about the angle of his shoulders told Petra that the space between this moment and whatever came next was larger than it appeared. She should have moved on. There were 4 other people in the waiting room. Sandra's notes on the pending chart were a mess. The attending, Dr. Yusuf Abara, had already paged her once about a patient in Bay 3. She didn't move on. "Can I get you some water?" she asked. He looked up, and for just a second, just one, the thing he'd been holding so carefully behind his eyes shifted, and she saw it. Not what it was exactly, but that it was there. "Sure," he said. "Thank you." She came back with a paper cup and a packet of crackers from the nurse's station that nobody had asked for. She set them on the chair beside him without comment, the way you'd leave something for someone without wanting to make them feel watched. She went back to work. Later, maybe 40 minutes later, maybe more. When she came back to clear the cubicle, he was gone. The paper cup was empty. The crackers were gone. And under the cup, folded once, was a business card. On the back of it, in handwriting that was careful the way someone's handwriting gets when they're trying very hard, were 4 words. That helped. Thank you. As she stood there for a moment, card in hand, the curtain swaying slightly from the ventilation overhead, she didn't know what he meant exactly. The water, the crackers, the silence she'd offered instead of questions. She put the card in the pocket of her scrubs and went back to Bay 3. She didn't expect to think about him again. She was wrong about that. The thing about kindness is that it doesn't ask permission before it lodges somewhere in you. Adrian Mercer had spent the better part of 3 years convincing himself that what he wanted most was to be left alone, or at least for the people around him to stop wanting things from him that he couldn't give. His ex-wife, Claudine, had told him in the final conversation of their marriage that he was fluent in every language except the one that matters. He'd thought about that sentence for a long time afterward, mostly in hotel rooms, mostly at 3 in the morning. He'd built Mercer Lund from the remnants of his father's mid-sized investment firm, after the 2008 collapse had gutted it to the studs. He'd done it with something close to obsession and nothing close to joy. By the time the firm had recovered, exceeded in ways that made financial journalists write breathless profiles, he'd forgotten what he'd been trying to prove and to whom. His father had died in 2019. His mother lived in Victoria and called on birthdays in a way that felt more like a formality than anything else. He had friends, technically, men he'd gone to Upper Canada College with who texted him about the Leafs and invited him to cottages he never attended. He had a corner office with a view of the lake that cost more per square foot than most people's apartments. He had, in the 2 weeks before that November evening, quietly stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night and started waking up in the dark with a pressure in his chest that he had no medical explanation for and had, for reasons he still couldn't quite articulate, not told anyone about. The glass in his office had not broken the way the paperwork implied. He didn't examine that too closely. What he did examine, with a frequency that surprised him, was the business card. He'd pick it up from his desk drawer where he'd placed it. He wasn't sure why he'd kept it. And read those 4 words. That helped. Thank you. It was such a small thing to have written. Such a specific thing. That helped. Not thank you for your service or great work tonight. That helped. As if she'd understood without being told something had needed to. He didn't go back to St. Michael's. He wanted to. He talked himself out of it the way he talked himself out of most things that felt adjacent to vulnerability, by being very busy and very deliberate about it. He slept better. Not great, but better. He started eating lunch again, which his assistant, Gordon, noticed and commented on, with the kind of restrained relief that indicated Gordon had been worried for some time and was too professional to say so. Adrian noticed this and made a note to give Gordon a raise, which he then did without explanation because some things don't need explaining. December arrived with the particular aggression it always brings to Toronto. The cold that comes off the lake, the way the darkness arrives at 4:30 like someone pulling a curtain, the Christmas lights on King Street that are cheerful in a way that can tip, on certain nights, into something almost unbearable. He went to the hospital gala. He hadn't planned to. It was the St. Michael's Annual Foundation Gala, one of those fundraising evenings he was typically invited to and typically delegated. A check sent, a table bought, his absence politely explained. But in early December, he'd looked at the invitation on his desk and thought of a paper cup and 4 words, and said yes, before he could think about it clearly. The gala was held in the hospital's new atrium, which had been designed to look nothing like a hospital, and mostly succeeded. There were hundreds of people in good coats and good shoes, doctors and donors and board members circulating with champagne. The kind of event where you're supposed to feel good about the world's architecture. Adrian Mercer stood near the edge of the room and looked for someone he recognized. He found her by accident. She was near the far wall talking to an older woman in what appeared to be a heated conversation about the catering. She was wearing a dark green dress that was clearly not bought for occasions like this. Not wrong exactly, just honest in a way most things in the room were not. Her hair was up. She had a look on her face that was pure, undiluted concentration. He recognized the concentration before he recognized her face. He crossed the room. "The cheese is from Quebec," he heard her say as he approached. "You can tell by the texture. The label says Ontario, but that's not." She stopped, turned, saw him. Something moved across her expression. Not recognition exactly, or not only that. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "You remember me," he said. "I remember most patients," she said, which was probably true and probably not the whole truth. The older woman excused herself with the subtle grace of someone who has spent years identifying her moment to exit. "You came to the gala," Petra said. "You work here," he said. "Obviously." "I'm a student," she said. "Second year. I'm here because my program director bought a table and 3 people canceled. Lucky cancellations," he said. She looked at him steadily. Petra Vance had, he would come to understand, a way of looking at people that was neither warm nor cold but simply direct, as if she were reading something written in a language she happened to know. "How's your hand?" she asked. He held it up. "Healed, good." She paused. "Did you follow up with your GP like the discharge sheet said?" He had not. "Yes," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "No," he admitted. "Mr. Mercer." "Adrian," he said. She considered this. "Adrian, you had a moderately significant laceration on your dominant hand that could have become infected. It didn't." "That's not really the point." "What is the point?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at him with that direct look. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm not sure why I'm lecturing a stranger at a hospital gala about aftercare instructions." "I kept your card," he said. It came out before he decided to say it. A beat of silence. "The business card," he clarified. "You?" "The business card was in the cup. I kept it. I noticed you didn't call." "I noticed that too," he said. She laughed. It was a small laugh, contained, but real. The kind that escapes before a person decides whether to let it. He thought it was possibly the nicest sound he'd heard in several months. They talked for an hour. Not about the things people usually talk about at galas. She told him about growing up in Sudbury, about her father who'd worked the mines until his knees gave out, about choosing nursing because her grandmother had been a nurse, and also because she was good at staying calm in rooms where other people were not. He told her, and this surprised him, the ease of it, about his father's firm, about the years of rebuilding. Not the profile version, the one with the triumphant arc, but the actual version, with the months of not sleeping and the dinners he'd eaten alone over spreadsheets, and the particular shame of watching something you love collapse and not being able to stop it. She listened the way she'd been quiet in the cubicle, not waiting for her turn, actually listening. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked at some point. Not unkindly, he thought about it. "I'm not sure," he said. "You seem like someone who can hold things carefully." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a strange thing to say, probably," he said. "It's also," she stopped. "What?" "Accurate," she said quietly. "I think. I hope." They were interrupted 3 times. Once by a colleague of his who clasped his shoulder and said something hearty and forgettable. Once by Petra's program director who reminded her. The table was sitting down for dinner. Once by a waiter with champagne that neither of them took. At the end of the evening, standing at the coat check with the polite chaos of 200 people also leaving, he asked if he could call her. She was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. "I'm not looking for," she started. "Neither am I," he said. "I mean that." She looked at him. The direct look. "Reading something." "Okay," she said. He called her the following Thursday. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes about a documentary she'd watched about Arctic shipping routes, which led to a conversation about supply chains, which led somehow to a 20-minute digression about the history of the saint, Lawrence Seaway, that neither of them could fully explain afterward. He was smiling when he hung up. He noticed this. Gordon noticed it too, which Adrian discovered when Gordon appeared in the office doorway the next morning with coffee he hadn't ordered, and the expression of someone who has decided not to say anything and is working very hard at it. "Gordon," Adrian said. "Sir, thank you for the coffee. Of course, you can go." Gordon went, visibly satisfied. What followed was not a love story in the conventional sense. It didn't move in the straight line that love stories are supposed to move in, and Petra Vance was not a woman who moved in straight lines. She had a 12-hour shift rotation that made weeks unpredictable. She had a roommate named Cass and a cat she was not supposed to have in her apartment that she had named Argument because, she explained, that's what she'd had with herself before getting him. She had strong opinions about the way hospitals were managed, and stronger ones about the way nursing students were trained, and she was constitutionally incapable of small talk, which Adrian found not just acceptable, but gradually essential. He started sleeping better, not because anything had been resolved, because something had been interrupted. That was what he couldn't explain to people, the small intervention of it, the paper cup, the crackers, the silence offered instead of questions. Nobody had done anything large. She hadn't saved his life with a speech or a grand gesture or the kind of cathartic confrontation. that makes for good television. She had simply seen that something was wrong and not looked away, and then handed him crackers, and that had been, improbably, enough to interrupt the trajectory he hadn't known he was on. He told her this, eventually. Not all of it. Some things take time to name, but enough. On a Sunday afternoon in January, walking along the waterfront trail with the lake frozen gray-white out to the horizon and their breath visible in the air, he told her what the weeks before November had been like. The 3-hour nights, the pressure in his chest, the glass. She walked beside him without interrupting. I wasn't. He stopped, started again. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. That night, I wasn't sure of much. She was quiet for a few steps. I know, she said, or I thought. I wasn't certain, but I thought. You didn't ask. No, she said. I didn't think asking was what you needed. What did you think I needed? She considered it. To be in a room where someone knew something was wrong and didn't make it into a problem to be solved. He didn't say anything. The ice on the lake made a sound, a low, distant groan that could have been temperature change and sounded like something older. You left crackers, he said. There were crackers available, she said, with a straightness that was, he now understood, her version of tenderness. He laughed. It surprised him, the fullness of it, the way it came from somewhere that hadn't been open in a long time. She looked at him sideways, allowed herself a small smile. I thought about you, she said. After, I wondered if you were okay. I was, he said. Eventually, you helped. The crackers helped, she said. Petra. The crackers and the cup, she said. Very good cup. Exactly the right amount of water. Stop. She stopped, smiled. A real one, uncontained, the kind she didn't always let out. The cold had put color in her face. The lake spread out behind her in every direction, gray and still and very large. He thought. I would like to keep this, not possess it. Just not lose it. He didn't say that. It was January and there was time, and some things earn their words slowly. But he kept walking beside her and she kept walking beside him. And the city rose behind them, with all its indifferent noise. And on the frozen lake the ice shifted and groaned and held. 3 months later, at a small dinner she'd organized in her apartment, Cass absent, argument occupying the better part of the couch, she asked him, between the soup and whatever she'd made that she was calling a rice situation, whether he was seeing anyone. A therapist. She said it lightly, the way she said serious things. He was quiet. I started, he said. 2 weeks ago. She's nodded, passed him the rice. Good, she said. He took the rice. Looked at her across the small table in the small apartment, with the cat rearranging himself loudly in the background. Thank you, he said. For the crackers. She kept her face very still. You're welcome, she said. For the crackers. And they were quiet together, the easy kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. And outside the window the February snow came down in the particular soft way it does in Toronto when the wind isn't blowing. And the city was very quiet. And the rice was fine. And it was, Adrian Mercer thought, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, enough.